Basically, let's just look at this. It looks pretty similar to what we had before, even though it's a little bit different. And I know it looks kind of scary to sort of have just something all of a sudden that looks new. But if we break it down, I told you we could ignore the private part, right? That's basically just the scope. This is actually the same as if I said this. It's just telling the computer like what can actually access this. So we can actually just ignore that, right? So at its core, it's basically this. Character, and then these square brackets. Most C-style languages use sort of like this, where that sort of means array. So this is like a 1D array, right? So if we call that character, we'll call it like test. So this is a one-dimensional character array. So for example, this will sort of look like, if I put a comment here, you can have an array of like numbers, right? That would be like an integer array if this said like int. But since it is character, like it can sort of look like this. You can have like any sort of letters in here. So that's kind of what you could expect it to contain, right? Now, what does this comma mean? This comma actually, and the comma indicates this actually, or it hints towards this, is that it kind of looks like this in other languages. It's actually a 2D array. And so in this language, C#, we're using a comma instead, because this this two pairs of square brackets is actually something a little bit different. It's still like a 2D array, but it's unbounded. So it's actually an array of arrays, but you don't need to worry about that. What you just need to know is this is like a 2D array. And what a 2D array is, if you remember, like we can store things in a bit of a different way. So instead of like doing like A, B, X, Y, right? So this would be a one-dimensional array. Instead of doing this, what we can do is store it in a 2D array, right? So this is like a 1x4, right? 1D array. And how this would normally look is like you would have character 4 test, right? To show that it's like an array of 4, right? And in this sort of syntax, you might see something like character test equals new character 4, right? That just indicates like create a new character array with 4 slots, 4 spaces to put things, right? So that's what we would do for something that maybe contains this, right? And then we would go like test at 0 equals A, and like test at 1 equals B, sort of like that, and we'll fill it out with like 2 and 4, or like 2 and 3. Forgot how to count for a second there, with like X and Y, right? And that will give us exactly this output, right? And so instead of that, what we want to do is we're saying, hey, since we are doing like a grid where it's not all just on one line, right? We could store this all on one line, but it probably makes more sense for us, and it'll make it easier for us to work on it if it is in a 2D array. And you can catch the lesson on 2D arrays from last week. I guess it was 2 weeks from now. But you can essentially add a dimension to this by putting this comma, right? So you can see, instead of that, we can do a 2x2, right? So this is the row number, and this is, or the number of rows, and this is the number of columns. And so instead of this, what we actually want to do is sort of have it like this, right? Where we have row 1, here, this is 2x2, 2D array, where we have row 1 is A, and then B, and then row 2 is X and then Y. And so the columns would be like 0 and like 1 here. And then over here, we would have 0 and 1 for the rows, right? So it would kind of be aligned like this, and these would be the index coordinates for it. So like 0, 0, for example. So like test at 0, 0, 0 would equal A, right? So it kind of looked like this. And then the same thing goes for like test at 0, 1, right? Test at 0, 1 would be B. And then the same for like X and Y. So like X and Y would be, this one would be 1, 0, and then this one would be 1, 1, right? So that was your quick refresher on 2D arrays. And that's essentially what this is right now. And you'll notice that we're not actually initializing the array with any value, right? We're telling it that it's a new array, but we're not actually filling it with any data until later on, right? You could make this filled initially, right? You can actually like do an array that already has this directly, right? And we already went over that before, but since we are initializing it as a new character, we're just telling the computer, hey, make some space for these, for this specific number of slots, right? So over here, it was, we had 4 before, new character 4. So for this, we're actually saying, make a new character array with 4 slots. And then we're promising it basically that we're going to fill it up later, right? Later on in the program with something like this. And so now that we have that in mind, this is doing really the same thing. It's telling them, or telling the computer, make a character array that's 2D that we're going to use later on, and make it so that you have H number of rows, which is we know to be 10, and W number of columns, which we know to be 10 as well, right? And so this is just saying, make a 10 by 10 array that we're going to fill with characters later. Now we can look at where it's actually used. And we know that somehow it has to relate to the text file, because we know that this is a 10 by 10 text file of characters, right? And so let's take a look. Oh, look at that. There's a comment. So this is a really common thing that programmers do. They'll add a comment with to do so that they have a note to themselves to fill this out later, right? And so this one says, fill the level array with data from the file level.txt. And so we know this is where we're going to be writing code today, right? But before we do that, let's take a look at where else level is used, right? So if we go down, this is where we were before, and that's what led us to looking for this level variable. And this is basically saying character t equals the specific character at this index, right, in the array. So we can take a look. This is a for loop, and it seems like we're starting from 0 and going all the way to height. So this is going from 0 to 10, and then inside it is another for loop going from 0 to 10. So what this looks like, it's actually going through every single row and every single column. And so we know that that actually means that it's iterating through every single slot in the array, right? And character t is just a temporary variable that we're using to store whichever character that we're on currently. So if you think about this like in a step-by-step way, you'll know that like if it goes down here, R starts at 0, right? And then it starts this whole loop. Then this will go 0, do all of these, and then this will go 1, do all of these, and then this will go 2, do all of these, all the way until 10, and then it'll turn this into 1, right? So the first number that this is going to possibly be is 0, 0, right? It's going to go 0, 0, and then it's going to go through all these, and then it's going to go 0, 1, and then go through all these, and so on, right? You can catch our lesson on loops if you need a refresher on that. But let's take a look at what we actually use that character for, right? Since we're going through every single character in this level character array. So it's actually taking everything in level, right? And remember, there's nothing in level right now because we haven't filled it up yet. That's what the to-do is for. the to-do is to fill the level array with data. We actually have to give that data to the computer because it doesn't know automatically. It knows that there's this file, but it doesn't know how to take the data from that file. So we actually have to bridge that gap. We have to help out the computer a little bit, right? And so after this, we can see that there are actually some conditions, right? Some if conditions. And so it's actually comparing t to different characters, right? It's saying, oh, if t is a space. So the computer sees, oh, t is the space, then it runs into here. And we don't actually need to know what this means, but we can kind of read it in English. Sprite batch.draw. We know that it's probably drawing something, right? This should look very familiar to you. White. That was actually, if you remember, one of the variables that we looked at up here, right? In this giant list of variables, we had white. So now that we see that, we can sort of see like, hey, it looks like when it finds a character of space, right? Similar to what we have in the level here. When it finds a space, it's actually drawing the white tile, right? And you'll actually see this if you go into the content folder. You can actually take a look at what all of the images look like. I don't know if I can actually open it up here. Oh, you can. Cool. So you'll see that the green part is just transparent. It's like the checkerboard, but you can actually take a look at all these images. It looks like all of these images have corresponding variables. And so the variables are probably referring to these, and these are probably the images that are being loaded into those variables, right? And so I can actually close all of these, but it's always nice to be able to see visually what you're actually using, because I think that helps you a lot in determining like what is actually happening behind the scenes, right? And so now that we know that if it encounters a space, the space actually tells the computer to draw a white tile, which is what we just saw. P will draw Aki, right? And so you kind of go through this the same way. O will be, it'll draw blue, but then it'll draw a circle on top of that. And then if it's X, then it draws a blue background with a box, right? And then if it's a dash, it'll draw a pink box. And so we haven't been able to see this yet. And that's because we know that level is actually empty right now, right? We know that because we haven't done the appropriate things in order to fill level. And what we can actually do